Today's Global Science Media Forum, Center Forum, represents the first step towards establishing a Science Media Center in Korea. Our purpose in convening this gathering is to gain insights from the countries that have already operated successfully science media centers, and to seek valuable guidance for the establishment of a science media center in Korea. To this end, we have an amazing group of SMC experts from 5 different countries with us today. And this opportunity will prove to be an invaluable asset as we work towards establishing SMC in Korea. As you know, Science Media Center is an organization that plays a crucial role as a mediator between science and technology and media. It provides support for experts to swiftly validate scientific research outcomes and ensures the rapid and accurate dissemination of science and technology information through various media platforms. Starting in the United Kingdom, it is now actively operating in countries worldwide. In Korea, there has been growing discussions for years about the need to establish a science media center, as it has become an important issue to improve the professionalism and the accuracy of science and technology news. This is why COPA, our foundation, has paid attention to the Science Media Center, because it is the only institution dedicated to facilitating communication between science and society. So I kindly ask all of you for continued interest and support. Once again, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to everyone who has joined us in this occasion. Well, thank you once again. Thank you.
It's a great privilege to be here, and we're extremely excited about the prospect of adding another science media center to our global network. So my name's Tom Sheldon. I work at the Science Media Center in the UK. So our SMC was established 20 years ago now, and we describe it as an independent press office for science. And the origin of the SMC is that in too many stories, the media were saying one thing, but the evidence showed something quite different. And this was true in so many important stories where it was so crucial that the public had a clear understanding of what was true and what was false. But scientists were absent from those debates. And without the scientists making the facts available for the public, then the public just didn't know what to believe, as they were faced with conflicting views from campaigners, from government, and from people for whom truth did not matter so much. When these stories arise, it's critical that the public hear what the scientists are saying. But the public are not going in search of scientists' voices. They are simply consuming the news in the media. So it was decided that an organization be set up to try to bridge that gap between science and journalists, so that what the media reported was more accurate. And we only have one goal, which is to improve the quality of reporting of science in the news, so that the public receive accurate, evidence-based information about the most important subjects in their lives. And we do that by working with science, health, and environment journalists at every major news outlet in the UK and agencies. And those journalists over time have come to recognize the SMC as a reliable and trusted source of expertise. But we don't provide that expertise ourselves, of course. We're not the scientists. We have a database of over 3,500 scientists and press officers working in universities and research labs and scientific companies across the country. And they've all offered to lend their time and expertise to inform the media when their subject is in the news. And they do it all for free. And there are now 7 fully operational SMCs around the world: UK, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Taiwan, Kenya, and Spain. And I hope that soon I can proudly tell everyone that there are 8. Now, all our operations and funding are a little different, and we're all independent. But crucially, we all have the same values: honest, open representation of evidence for the benefit of the public. So I'll talk a little bit about what we do and how we do it. Our focus is on controversial and headline stories. And we do this in 4 ways. We do media briefings, where you will have a panel of scientists sitting in front of an audience of journalists explaining the science directly to them. And this has a great benefit, not just because the journalists can hear from the scientists directly in their own words, but it also gives the journalists an opportunity to interrogate those scientists. And that's really important. The media is free, and the media must be free. Telling the stories is the job of a journalist. The media is not there to simply write out what scientists say without question or challenge. It's important that this is a two-way conversation between journalists and scientists. And it has the added benefit of those journalists all hearing what a panel of scientists have to say in response to all the questions that are asked by all those journalists. We find very often that at the end of a media briefing, which only lasts for 1 hour, all the journalists go away with a much greater understanding of the evidence of the subject that's being spoken about. And that's a very efficient use of their time and of scientists' time. The second thing we do every day is roundups. And that's when we email quotes from scientists directly to journalists about new, usually embargoed research in journals. And of course, the journalists receive the press releases from the big journals like Nature and Science and the BMJ. But they get so many press releases every day that it's very difficult for journalists to analyze every press release and understand the whole scientific paper. So scientists offer their time to help the journalists do that. And that can be a very effective way of highlighting bad science, because unfortunately there's bad science in the journals all the time, but of also giving journalists the confidence to report a good science paper when it is received positively by the scientific community. Rapid reactions is similar, but that's in response to breaking news. When there is a new story which emerges unexpectedly, such as COVID-19, then journalists are very often looking urgently for accurate, reliable scientific information. And we provide that information from scientists in real time, sometimes asking journalists, what questions do you want to ask? We then put those to 10 or 20 or 100 scientists, and then we make their answers available to all the journalists. We're a source for journalists of the best evidence and expertise that there is on a subject. We don't do PR, and we don't represent any organization. So although I've described us as a press office, we're not like a conventional press office that might represent COFAC or the Wellcome Trust or a government department or a university. So we are simply representing the wider mainstream scientific community. We have total operational independence from our funders. All SMCs have to get their funding somehow, and we all get our funding in different ways. But no funder can ever tell us what to do. We recognize and understand media values. Scientists do not always recognize and understand media values, and part of our job is helping and educating scientists to march in step with the media. But as I've said, the media also has to remain independent. It's not and must never be a mouthpiece for science. We encourage and support scientists to engage with the media. We try to tell the truth, even when that truth might be inconvenient. We try to help journalists to understand the science and to separate fact from fiction, but then we let them decide what to write and how to tell the story to their audience. But there are tensions between science and the media. The media is fast-moving, it's demanding, it often simplifies, and headlines can lack nuance. Science, on the other hand, is slow, cautious, sometimes overcautious. It's complicated, full of caveats, and it can feel inaccessible to ordinary people. Often scientists don't know how to access the media, even if they're willing to do so. So the SMC gives them a way in where they feel safe and supported. But we try to educate scientists and make them understand that if they don't speak to journalists, someone else will. And I think if I had to sum up the importance and what drives an SMC most, it's maybe that one line. If you're the right expert, but you choose not to speak to a journalist, someone else will. The story will not go away. It will just be worse because of your absence. And that someone might be a campaigner or a politician who's not so interested in telling the truth to a journalist. And I ask you to imagine the pandemic without scientists communicating, because scientific journals and government press releases would simply not have been enough. And in countries that had successful pandemics, I think the communication of science by scientists on an hour-by-hour basis for years was absolutely essential to public trust. And the more scientists who engage with the media and choose to do so, then the more normal it becomes for the whole scientific community. Others will follow. But sometimes there is valid scientific disagreement, such as on how you go about achieving net zero. That's something that scientists and engineers reasonably disagree on, and that's okay. The SMC should always represent those different viewpoints, even when they conflict. In fact, it's a benefit to everyone to represent those different viewpoints, because by showing that you're not afraid to show views that might conflict with each other, because scientists are human, they will have sometimes different views. I think you encourage the trust of journalists to know that you will always tell the truth. Never hide inconvenient information or seek to persuade people to believe something. That might seem like a strange thing to say, but we're big believers in providing people with the evidence in an accessible way so that they can make up their own minds. Evidence is most powerful when it stays neutral. Also, make sure that scientists stay in their lanes. Cardiologists are not experts on climate change, and physicists are not experts on pandemics. We should always avoid just going to the same one or two scientists to be commentators on every subject, because people will soon lose trust that way, and they will get it wrong. We always try to find the best scientists. So thank you for listening, and we very much hope to welcome a Korean SMC to our network soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Motoko. I am a media officer with the Saiyensmidiocenter of Japan, but my full-time job right now is I'm a press officer at the University of Tokyo. I'm with the Saiyensmidiocenter, but I work for a university. I will go into that in a bit. So unlike the other SMCs, the situation in Japan was kind of completely different. So we heard from Tom that the SMC was established because the quality of science reporting in the UK was so bad that the scientists wanted a change. In Japan, traditionally, the science reporting has been absolutely excellent. It was one of the best in the world. The major newspaper companies, they would have 30 to 50 science reporters. They had very good scientist databases. They knew the good scientists. When there was a controversial issue coming up, the science journalists, they knew what to do. And this is all part of a very linear system where, say, if something controversial came up, what the protocol was that the scientists would gather in their academies, their committees, their groups, they would have a discussion, and they would bring out a unanimous statement stating this is what the scientists say about this issue. And that is what the public heard from the media, and that was a very comfortable relationship. But that all has changed in the last 20 or so years. And rather a linear relationship, it's been quite complicated in that the public trust in the media has gone down for many reasons, but I think the Fukushima nuclear disaster was one very big factor which put a huge dent in public trust in the media. A lot of universities are producing press releases. They are doing more outreach to promote their research. A lot of the scientists, they're going on social media, on Twitter, TikTok. They are talking about their opinions on science now. So in light of all of this, the Science Media Center of Japan was set up because we realized that the the utopia that Japan was going to break down with public trust in media going down. And for many reasons, this is probably one of our biggest faults. So as Dr. Kim had mentioned in his talk, that for a science media center in Korea, perhaps the best idea is to build a solid foundation. And after there is a foundation, you can start strengthening relationships between scientists and journalists. This is exactly the idea that the Science Media Center in Japan had, but unfortunately, I don't know, a few months after we were established, the Fukushima nuclear power plant exploded. And suddenly we had a huge number of media inquiries. We had journalists scrambling to get information. We had scientists who were tied to committees, but they wanted to provide the media with accurate information. And we were able to work through that thanks to the Global Science Media Center Network. Now, we were commended for our work there. The government loved it. The public were in debt to us. But the problem is that because of that, we became not the Science Media Center, but the place to go to about radiation, the place to go about the Fukushima disaster. So it was very difficult for us to start new relationships with different scientists when they say, oh, but what you do you don't do science, you specialize in radiation. I think the other thing that really stopped our activity was very simply money. So initially we were funded completely by the Ministry of Education and Science in Japan. We were independent. We could do what we want with the money. But in Japan, traditionally, the government, as soon as they say you have, say, 3 years or 5 years of funding, once that period is up, that is it. They will not renew it for any reason. And initially, we had hoped to create a sustainable system like the New Zealand Science Media Centre, like the Australian and the UK Science Media Centres, where we collect money from different organisations. And we have a cap rule to make sure that no one would dominate our agenda. Now, the problem is that when we were set up, no one had really heard of startups. And NPOs, non-profit organizations, they were a very new thing to Japan. And because everything related to science was fully funded by the government, the idea of someone who wasn't in government funding a science media center was a very foreign idea. And in fact, one of our supporters has recently told us that that society has changed with the pandemic. There have been a lot of startups happening in Japan, that if the SMC in Japan were to have started 10 years later, say this year, it probably would have been more successful than we were 10 years ago. And so what is it like what is it like today? So as a university press officer, my job is to produce press releases. And it's not just my university, it is every university in Japan. And there are about 700 universities in Japan, and they are all producing press releases every day. And for the media, they are completely overwhelmed. One reporter I talked to said, every press release she gets is the world's first, the biggest, the most amazing, the first case. She says it's so much noise, she cannot tell. It is very difficult to tell what is good and what is just noise. And so for these kinds of reasons, we still believe that the Science Media Center of Japan has a chance of reviving itself, simply because the media is struggling to navigate in this kind of new, this new sea of information. And of course, the experienced science journalists at even these big companies, they are all losing their jobs. That we expect maybe in the next 10 years, Japan will have a very, very few number of very good science journalists. So when that happens, we will have general reporters doing the news, and they really need help. And we have the scientists, they are expected to do more work by themselves, become spokespeople for their fields. They don't have the training. And I think one of the last reasons why I think the Science Media Center has a good chance at reviving itself is that even though we have been largely inactive for the past 10 years, we have never ever stopped giving media training programs for young scientists. We have always had invitations from universities to come and train their young graduates or young researchers to teach them how to communicate about their research. So the future, I think, is still bright. I still have hope, and I am very much looking forward to working with colleagues at a Korean Science Media Center. Thank you.